Hello, everyone. This is the mind of Lilith, and thank you for joining me today. I hope you are all doing well. So, for today's discussion, I wanted to discuss New York City politics, specifically Zohran Mamdani's term as mayor, his potential term as mayor of New York City. He has been elected. So, according to the news media press, he is a Muslim democratic socialist, which is alarming for the conservatives and Republicans and the money makers in New York City. So New York City is the capital of capitalism. It has been this for many decades, if not centuries, okay? And New York City is a very diverse city, diverse based on race, culture, religions, language, nationality, immigration status, income. There's so many divergent interests here that Zohran Mamdani is going to have to be very careful and realistic about some of the policies that he has promised to enforce. So, first and foremost, New York City started going through a major gentrification in 2001 after former mayor Michael Bloomberg came into office. This is right after 9/11, okay? Michael Bloomberg comes into office and he pretty much facilitates the massive gentrification that we saw in the decades afterwards. So, when I was in high school, I used to hang out in downtown Brooklyn a lot, and there were a lot of small shops, fabric shops. You'd sell sewing machines, clothes, just regular small restaurants, really like mom and pop shop stores. There were not a lot of corporations in downtown Brooklyn. You had some banks there, but after Bloomberg took office, he pretty much sold the city out. And gentrification went into overdrive. You started seeing CVS's and Rite Aids on every corner. You started seeing Starbucks and Panera Breads and these gyms, right? There was a lot of economic investment in the city from corporations that had abandoned the city for decades after white flight. White flight was an exodus movement that was facilitated by white working class people in the 1970s who moved to the suburbs. They moved to Howard Beach, to Long Island, to parts of Queens. They left the inner cities behind, and the landlords who owned the properties in the inner cities burned them down for the insurance money, but also to ensure that the Black people and the minorities who were still there would not take those properties over and sell them for millions of dollars 25, 30 years later when they would return. So during that time period when the city was being burnt down, New York City lost its status of being the financial capital of the world. It had gone bankrupt in the 70s and 80s and whatever. But instead, it became a cultural hub for music and TV and fashion and so on and so forth. And that brand was used to sell New York City to gentrifiers from Ohio and the Midwest and the suburbs, right? They wanted to be close to the vibes, to the culture, to the fashion, the music, the entertainment. It wasn't just about the money, because at that point, New York City was still very affordable because, again, it had been divested from by the corporations. There was no major corporate investment in New York City until Bloomberg came into office and sold the city out, writing himself a third term for 12 years, which I thought was illegal, but he got away with it. When Bloomberg came into office, I think he was worth $2.5 billion. When he left, he was worth $25 billion because he was getting paid off of those construction contracts that pretty much, again, got rid of a lot of the working class population. A lot of them went to Jersey, Philadelphia, down south. They left New York City. So the city became attractive to the yuppies, the non-working, wealthy, upper-class white people who could afford to pay $4,000, $5,000 a month for a two-bedroom apartment, the ones who did not really have to work to survive because they had their parents supporting them, and they're here now. But now they're also getting priced out too because you have over 1 million millionaires living in New York City. So those millionaires don't have to ask their parents to sponsor them or take care of them. Those millionaires are relatively self-sufficient and they can afford to pay $10,000 a month. They can buy up the brownstones. They can buy up the block. So New York City has been gentrified. There's still areas being gentrified like East New York and Brownsville, but for the most part, Crown Heights, Flatbush, Park Slope, Fort Greene, Prospect Park, Eastern Parkway, Crown Heights, those areas have been gentrified, especially Bushwick. Bushwick was the first to be gentrified. What happened with Bushwick is that Bushwick had a lot of beautiful homes, a lot of beautiful brownstones. But again, the neighborhoods had been gutted and neglected and destroyed by landlords who were burning down their properties, but also the crackheads who were living in their properties and burning them down as well. So there was a lot of decline in these neighborhoods, okay, over decades. back in 2001, I would hang out in downtown Brooklyn, like Hoyt Street, J Street, Bridge Street, those areas. And you would see a lot of mom and pop shops. You would see a lot of retail stores, fabric stores, and things of that nature. You didn't really see a lot of major corporations except banks, or you didn't see a lot of franchises except banks in those areas. And they were few and far between. After Bloomberg came in, I remember in 2001 speaking to an Indian business owner, and he was closing his store. And I asked him what was going on. He said, well, my rent went from $2,500 a month to $7,000 a month. This is after Bloomberg came off. So was it 2001? It was 2002. It was 2002. I think his store was on Willoughby or Hoyt, one of those areas, Pearl, one of those areas. And he was like, yeah, my business is closing because I can't afford the basically 300% increase, $2,500 to $7,000 a month. And I started noticing every time I went to downtown Brooklyn, once a week or once a month, there were more and more stores closing. And those stores ended up being replaced by a CVS on every corner, a Rite Aid on every corner, banks on every corner, Starbucks, Walgreens, Wallbounds, Panera Bread. Like a lot of these major corporate franchises started taking up the real estate in downtown Brooklyn, in particular in other areas, but they sucked the soul out of the city, okay? So New York City was being marketed as a cultural hub to the yuppies who were coming in from the boring suburbs that their parents ran to avoid being around the Black people, okay? So now the yuppies they've gentrified Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights, Prospect Heights, Fort Greene, Flatbush. They're trying to come into Brownsville. Good luck with that. East New York. They're trying to get into Canarsie. Bushwick was the first to go. They renamed or rezoned Bushwick into Williamsburg. And I'm like, okay, when was this? But that was years ago. Bushwick was the first to be gentrified. And those apartments or houses went from like $800, $900 a month to like $3,000 to $4,000 a month, $1,000 a month to rent out a room in those areas. This was done intentionally. A lot of money was pouring into the city. So you also had international investors, okay? Investors from China and Japan and Russia buying up real estate, a lot of office buildings in downtown Brooklyn and Manhattan. Again, we have over 1 million millionaires in New York City, but those millionaires don't help the city to function. They're not the MTA train operators or bus operators. They're not the teachers. They're not the firefighters. They're not the Parks Department people who keep the Central Park clean or Prospect Park clean. They don't do that. They're just here to make money off their money, and that's it. They don't really add much to the culture of New York City, but they have a lot of power because they can determine who lives where based on how much money they're willing to pay for rents. So now the yuppies that were the first wave of gentrifiers that came in around 2001 and 2010, they're being pushed out by the second wave of gentrifiers who, feel safe now that the first wave of yuppies ethnically cleansed Bedford-Stuyvesant and bought up those brownstones. The second wave of gentrifiers who are millionaires are coming in and buying them or pricing out the first wave of yuppies who were working class, upper class, maybe making $250,000 a year. Their parents taking care of them, but they're not millionaires. The millionaires are buying up the real estate now, and they're buying up the brownstones and gutting out the whole brownstone and using it for their family. So that one brownstone that housed 3 families is only housing 1 family now. So it's also contributing to the housing crisis. So that's the issue. So now Mamdani is saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. There are so many divergent interests in the city because it's so diverse. Race, culture, age, ethnicity, so on and so forth. The city has lost its influence as a cultural hub, and people are only here to make money. And the city has become whack and dry culturally. There are no longer third spaces, or we have fewer third spaces than we did before, because even if we have the physical third space, people are too busy trying to make ends meet. When I was growing up in New York City, I had teachers who spent time after school, who donated time after school, preparing kids for showcases, step shows and dance shows and singing competitions. We had a system where we would cultivate talent, and that talent would be showcased to the community at different venues at different times. And that talent ultimately fed into the music industry. They became performers at the Apollo. And then you had record executives who were looking at these people who had been groomed and trained and prepared by these showcases. You had these record executives and A&Rs come to these venues and events to see the talent that the city or the community was producing. That is no longer there, or it's not there to the same extent because, again, millennials especially, and even Gen X, after 2008, everybody's in college trying to get a first degree, second degree, third degree. They're trying to make money. Pluto and Capricorn, hyper-capitalism, ruthless capitalism, people trying to survive and scrimp and save and whatever. So the soul of the city has been sucked out and is no longer considered a cultural hub. People come here to make money, okay? But the people with the most money don't make the city poppin'. They don't. The people with the most money, they're not the entertainers like that. They're the financiers. They own real estate and they make money off of money. They're not the singers, the dancers, the artists. And again, the lifeblood of the city are not the millionaires. So Zohran Mamdani, his policies seem to be catering to the working class or the poor population. But the money people, the 1 million millionaires and 1 billion billionaires who are in this city also have a lot of say in how things are going to go. With the international investors from China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia who have investments in New York City real estate, they want to maximize their profits. Because they want to maximize profits, they don't really care about who's living in their buildings as long as they can pay the exorbitant rents that they're asking for. Now, I will say this. A lot of the office buildings in downtown Brooklyn, Manhattan are empty. I walk around downtown Brooklyn all the time, and Eric Adams talked about converting those buildings into livable spaces, right? I don't know how that's going to work because from my experience and observation working in these buildings, like the cubicles on the upper levels don't have windows you can open. There's no ventilation like that. There's only one bathroom on the floor. I don't know how that's going to work. I'm not an engineer, an architect, so that's on them. But there's millions of square feet of unused office space that can be repurposed into other things. I think we do need more community spaces, but what's the point of having more third spaces, more community spaces if people cannot afford to live here? If people are working 16 hours a day or 60 hours a week and they're tired and they have to get their children from daycare or childcare or whatever. Mamdani has some interesting policy promises, but I don't think that he will be able to achieve or accomplish 50% of what he stated because from my experience working in nonprofits and working with the city, it takes longer to convince people to do certain things than it would take to actually implement the ideas that are being presented. So the city likes to stall. And I think that the powers that be, the millionaires who don't agree with his policies, they will try to stall him out. He has to figure out if he wants to make 20% of people 100% happy, 20% of people 80% happy, 50% of people 60% happy. Like, he has to split the difference, find out what the converging interests are among these different stakeholders. A quality of life issue that I think can be addressed immediately is the littering problem. Littering on New York City sidewalks and streets. New York City, even though it is, they have a lot of cars and stuff here, it is still a pedestrian city. It's a walkable city. The colonial cities that were built before the car, like Chicago and Boston and San Francisco, they are walkable cities by and large. So a lot of people walk around in New York City and they prefer to walk instead of taking a train or a cab. One of the things it can do immediately is prohibit people from urinating on the sidewalk, spitting on the sidewalk, throwing wrappers on the sidewalk, pouring out their coffees and sodas on the sidewalks, making them sticky, ugly, dirty, and nasty. Having more strict enforcements of dog poop, picking up after your dog. I'll give an example of what I'm talking about. So years ago, I was renting out an apartment in a house, and in New York City, we have sidewalks, we have curbs, and we have streets, okay? I was living on a one-way street, and it snowed a lot, like 20-something inches of snow. And so the snow was shoveled onto this curb. It was shoveled from the sidewalk onto the curb and from the street onto the curb as well. So there was a huge mound of ice on the curb, a huge amount of snow on the curb from the sidewalk and this one-way street, okay? So one day, a dog being walked in front of the building I was living in decided to jump on the mound of ice, okay, the highest point of the ice, because the dog wanted to mark his territory. And it urinated and pooped on the mound of ice, or the mound of snow. But it had become ice because it was there for days, because it was still freezing in New York. So every day after work, for the next 2 to 3 weeks, I had to see the dog poop on the mound of ice. And this happened over 15 years ago, and it's still stuck in my mind. So one of the major quality of life issues that can be addressed immediately, in my opinion, because it requires personal accountability, is the littering, the filth on the sidewalks, the dog pooping. Please don't poop on the sidewalk. Please don't pee in the streets. Please don't vomit in the streets. Please, whatever is going on, okay? Please keep the streets clean at a bare minimum. Nobody wants to see that or walk around that. This is not even in poor neighborhoods. In rich neighborhoods or wealthy neighborhoods, you have dog poop every 6 feet in some areas because a lot of rich people have dogs and they don't want to pick up after their dog. So you walk around rich neighborhoods, you'll be basically like, it's like a minefield of poop in New York City. So the first thing that can be done immediately that will cost almost, I won't say no money. It won't cost as much money because we do need more garbage cans in certain areas, which will require a larger sanitation budget, which is whatever. But please, the poop and the urine and the spitting on the sidewalks please, we need stricter enforcement of that. That doesn't cost a lot of money, but you want to use cops for something or community policing for something, use it for that. That's the first thing. Now, Mamdani also talked about the free buses. While that's a good idea, in theory, I think it's going to cause more problems because we have a major homelessness problem in New York City. I'm not talking about people in shelters. I'm talking about vagrants living in the subways, on the corners, in the streets, right? If the buses are free, I think it will encourage some homeless people to use the buses as temporary shelter during the daytime. The buses are warm. They're well ventilated. They're relatively safe. A lot of homeless vagrants seek shelter anywhere, the subways, so on and so forth. So just imagine a bus with a capacity of 100 people. I don't know what the capacity of New York City buses are. And in the back of that bus, you have homeless people, maybe 5 homeless people who are really smelly on the same bus as people going to work on a daily basis or, children going to school, right? At some point, there's going to be a confrontation because why would the homeless people get off the bus if they're there for free? Why would you kick them off, right? So the bus drivers will have to become enforcement officers, which is not their job title necessarily, even though we've seen bus drivers uppercut customers in the past, throw them off the bus. So why not, instead of saying free buses, say we'll reduce the fares 50% on the buses? That, to me, is more sustainable. The city will still get revenue, and I think it will discourage the vagrants from using the bus as like a motel or temporary shelter because a lot of working class people don't want to be on the same bus or train as somebody who is wiping their butts on the poles, okay? Or wiping their butt on the seats, being naked and dirty. Like, people will get dressed up to go to work. They look nice, smell good. They don't want to smell like a homeless person in the morning time. So I think to discourage the vagrants from getting on the buses for free, have a lower fare for them, for, New York City residents. Now, as far as the rent-free situation, this is going to be complicated. Although I do agree that the rent is too high in New York City and rents should be frozen. This brings me back to my point about the international investors or investors in real estate who want to make a substantial profit off of their properties. First of all, public housing and people who have subsidized rent or rent subsidies, the subsidies aren't for those people. The subsidies are for the corporations who don't want to pay a living wage. So if someone's living in public housing, then a corporation may say, we don't have to pay you as much money because you're living somewhere where it's cheap. So we can afford to pay you, we'll pay you $10 an hour because your rent is $500 a month or whatever it is, right? Your rent is cheap, but it's not cheap necessarily for the resident there. It is cheap for the corporation who does not want to pay a living wage, okay? So the language of low-income housing or whatever they call it, that should be changed to government subsidized housing, but it's not a government subsidy for the poor. It's a government subsidy for the corporations who don't want to pay a living wage, okay? Now, these people are more and more working class who are making $85,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year in New York City, which is not a lot because the average 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom in certain neighborhoods is like $3,000 a month. And you need to make 30 to 40 times the rent in some neighborhoods. So a lot of people who are making less than $100,000 are priced out, even if they're considered so-called middle class. The rent thing is positive, but again, I don't think that's going to be easily enforced because I remember years ago when they tried to make the broker fee illegal. And it worked for a month or so, but then they had to backtrack and it was finally ratified or passed last year, I think. But the cost of the broker fee was pretty much given to the renter. So instead of the renter paying 12% of the broker fee for the year up front, they would end up paying it over 12 months, right? So instead of you paying $10,000 for your broker fee, you would pay $1,000 a month or something like that, $800 a month towards your rent. So it kind of made it easier for people to move into apartments, because instead of needing maybe $8,000 to move into a 2-bedroom apartment, first month's rent, security, and then you got to pay the broker's fee, and then that's $7,500 alone without even paying for furniture, and then 30 days later you got to come with the next month's rent. So, because the rent has gotten so high, the yuppies that had gentrified Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights and Manhattan, they're moving more south to the hood areas, East New York and Brownsville and Canarsie, okay? They're spreading out because they can't even afford to live among their white neighbors anymore. So yeah, Mamdani, with the promise of the rent freeze, I don't know how viable that is. I think that these different stakeholders who are wealthy are going to try to wait him out. We also have unions, a massive union force here in New York City. DC 37, the UFT, the TWU, SEIU 1199. There are a lot of unions in New York City who have a vested interest in some of the policies that Mamdani will or will not pass. So he may have issues with them. So my point is, when you have a really diverse constituency, a very diverse demographic, it is hard to pass sweeping legislation without ruffling some feathers. I think Mamdani should focus on the main commonalities in his first term. I do believe that rent should be cheaper, lower, whatever. I agree with him a lot of things, but based on my experience with the city and the bureaucracy, they will stall him out for 4 years. They will keep having meetings and resolutions and town hall meetings and advising meetings and all this stuff. They'll keep having conversations, trying to run down the clock before his next election. Then they'll say, see, he was here for 4 years and got nothing accomplished. Vote for so-and-so and so. He'll get things done. It's a game they play. They all play the game. So I think Mamdani is very idealistic. I think he is overestimating his ability to get things done within a relatively short period of time. 4 years is very short for any New York City legislation to be passed. 4 years is short for a project for a city agency to be completed. These people burn through money. They don't use money efficiently, and Mamdani is right with that. There's a more efficient way of running the city. We waste lots of money. However, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of time will be spent arguing about the importance of these initiatives and the benefits of enforcing these plans than it would be to actually implement those plans. In a recent interview, Mamdani said that he was being attacked by the wealthy New Yorkers who did not want to have their taxes increase. And Mamdani said, well, they're spending more money attacking me than I would be taxing them. This is the logic of how things work in New York City. They'll spend more time arguing you down about something that needs to be done than actually implementing the plan and seeing if it's actually working. They'll spend more time and money. They will waste money to prevent you from doing something, to block something from happening, okay? So it's not just a matter of political will. You need a coalition of people to actually get things done. And he may have to be heavy-handed with some of his enforcement. The only way you receive little to no pushback with a city policy is if Albany is supporting it. So if Mamdani has plans for New York City that Albany does not support or agree with, he is going to be blocked. He's going to be stalled, sabotaged. They're going to waste his time. Meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And then there's a possibility that Kathy Hochul will say, no, we're not doing this, right? The state has the final say, not the city. So during the pandemic, when Mayor Eric Adams was complaining about the immigration situation that was happening, the governor agreed to what Biden's plans were. So he really couldn't do much. He had to do what Albany said. And the evidence of that is the fact that Joe Biden sent the FBI after Eric Adams when he started to complain about the unsustainability of the immigration policy. I think New York City increased their DOE student enrollment by 100,000 immigrants in 1 year, okay? Because there is a demographic collapse across all major cities in the United States, especially New York City, because millennials have spent the past 15 years going to college and getting degrees instead of getting married and having babies. So they created this problem. By the city being too unaffordable, it discouraged reproductive age millennials and some Gen Xers who are in their mid-40s now. Some could still have babies, especially the men. It discouraged the younger populations from having children because they got to go to work and go to school. And they're seeing how difficult it is to raise a child in New York City with childcare being $2,500 a month, $2,000 a month, $1,500 a month. That's rent in some areas. That's rent for a room or whatever. So it costs just as much money to rent an apartment as it does to have childcare. So you need two incomes, right? But how do you have two incomes when nobody's getting married because everybody's in college trying to survive and make money? So the culture of the city was destroyed by the hyper-capitalists who became even more empowered during the Pluto and Capricorn era, 2008 until 2023. Now millennials have more degrees than they have children. And so there's a demographic collapse. There are not enough young people being born to sustain the tax base for the massive retiree system. Again, there are a lot of city workers or civil servants in New York City who are going to get pensions and healthcare. And Mamdani even mentioned, he was like, yo, these New York City pensioners, they don't even live in the city when they retire. They go to Florida or to Texas or somewhere where it's cheaper. We want them to stay in New York City so that we can get that money back. We're losing billions of dollars every year as these retirees move to cheaper cost of living states, but they're still receiving pensions that are equivalent to a high cost of living city. So you're making $100,000 a year as a retired MTA worker, but you're living in Florida, Georgia, somewhere much cheaper, and that money is being lost. So he wants to reduce the rents to encourage pensioners to stay in New York City, which is smart. But again, we have lobbies who are against rent freezes. So there's this huge affordable housing cooperative in Queens called Rochdale Village. And they were recently charged $17 million for quote unquote unpaid water bill. Okay. And because of this so-called unpaid water bill, the overhead or the monthly costs of living in this village are now doubling. So people who were paying $950 a month, retirees who are paying that much money, they're now going to have to pay $1,400, $1,500 per month to stay in this building. This is a way for the large developers to get working class or retired people out of this neighborhood, okay? That co-op, Rochdale Village, is worth to them hundreds of millions of dollars. If we can pay this a percentage of this fake $17 million water bill, and the co-op goes into foreclosure, we can take the property for pennies on a dollar and sell it to investors or turn it into luxury housing. Instead of people paying $900 a month, they're paying $3,000 a month to live in this neighborhood, okay? That's the goal. This is what happened to this man in Canarsie, Brooklyn, who lost his $1 million home for a $6,000 water bill, something like that. And they said 6,000 homes in that area have the same water bill. So we have these shark investors. We have these gentrifiers. People come in with their little outfits on, pretending as if they don't have any money. They come in and they create circumstances where people are forced to leave their homes, and they can sell their properties to their people for lots of money, gentrifying the neighborhood, okay? And so, yeah, I don't know how Mamdani is going to deal with that, but there's a lot of corruption in New York City real estate to steal people's deeds, to put, liens on people's houses and then sell people's houses for tax bills or unpaid utility bills. You're taking someone's $1 million property for like a $5,000 water bill. Like, that's a hustle and a scam. This has happened across every neighborhood in New York City. Crown Heights, Flatbush, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Fort Greene, Park Slope, Prospect Heights. All those areas were gentrified and by using dirty tactics. And some people did sell out, but these vicious real estate investors used dirty, greasy, grimy, deceptive tactics to take this real estate from these people. The people who pay $900 a month are considered a nuisance to these people. They're like, yo, this is beautiful. Look at all this space, right? We could turn this into a cash cow. Instead of them paying $900 a month, we can charge them $3,000 a month just for the privilege of living in New York City. And you'll have dumb people willing to pay that price. So because of the preponderance of a certain group of people in the real estate business, the real estate lobby is very powerful in New York City, okay? They have a lot of money, they have a lot of muscle, legal teams, they have a lot of power in New York City. And so I don't know how likely it will be for Mamdani to enforce the rent freezes. What I will say is that if everybody's broke paying rent, they will cook for themselves instead of going to a Panera Bread or Sweet Green or Starbucks or whatever. They'll find ways to save money. But again, like I mentioned earlier, there are at least 1 million millionaires in New York City, which is why in some places you can buy a sandwich, a regular hero sandwich, bread, lettuce, tomatoes, meat, mayonnaise, mustard, cheese, for like $15, $20 for a small roll sandwich. They have the money to pay for that, all for the privilege of living in New York City, a New York City that's being branded as such by the culture of the people who are being priced out of the city. The artists, the actors, the singers, dancers, performers, whoever, the creative class, not the investor class, okay? Not the people who try to skirt their taxes. So again, just to say this final note, I think Mamdani has good intentions, but I don't think he understands how cutthroat these people are. He's already a Muslim. He's an immigrant. He's Indian. And he's not really someone who kisses the behind of the Israel lobby. The governor of New York is a pro-Zionist. Kathy Hochul and her friends in high places can easily sabotage Mamdani by stalling him and saying he's not an effective leader. He doesn't know how to talk across the aisle. He's ineffective. He needs to go. 4 years later. So he can make concessions and say, well, okay, rich people who are about 20% of New York City, either you'll get 100% of what you want or you'll get 50% of what you want. But those type of people don't really compromise. So the rich people will say, we want 80% of what we want, and we want the rest of the population to get 20% of what they want. At the bare minimum, we need to deal with the vagrant homeless problem. Homeless people sleeping in the subways, on sidewalks, on trains. That issue has to be dealt with. The mental health issue has to be dealt with. And I'll be honest, y'all might get mad at me about this, but I'm tired of smelling weed everywhere and some people looking just drugged out, coked out everywhere. So maybe I'm biased, I don't do drugs at all, but there has to be a better way for us to deal with our mental health issues in the city besides drugs and alcohol and other nonsense. We do need more green spaces. We need more parks. We need more grass and trees and flowers and plants and beauty in the city, not just concrete everywhere. And this is another thing too. The reason why there's so much flash flooding in New York City now is not because of climate change. It's because most of the topsoil that would absorb the rainwater, those areas have been paved over for buildings, for sidewalks, right? The nature is being destroyed in the city for money. So the hyper-capitalists want to make a dime, a dollar, a penny off of every square inch of New York City. If you see the way that these buildings are being built, they're so close to each other, every square inch they want to monetize. From beneath the ground, because people are living in their basements, to 300 feet in the air. They want to make a dollar, a dime, a penny off every square inch of real estate. And that's why we have a lot of floods now. Because the old drain systems that we built in the 1900s, they can't handle all the rainwater because the soil is not there to absorb it. So they're creating the climate crisis problem with their greed and hypercapitalism. So yeah, I think Mamdani has good intentions, but realistically speaking, as a New York City resident, I don't think he's going to be able to pass many of the policies that he is proposing, not just because there's a lack of willpower, but again, there are too many divergent interests, too many people interested in maintaining the status quo for their benefit. Some of these people think they own the city and the rest of us are just here to serve them. So with 1 million millionaires, if all the working class people leave, who's going to teach their children? Who's going to clean the streets? Who's going to maintain the parks? Who's going to serve in restaurants? Who's going to put on the Broadway shows? Who's going to be at the universities? Who is going to be here to entertain the rich folk if we're all gone? And they have to consider that. If they don't, then it's on them. But yeah, he's going to have to find a way to either make the most amount of people happy, right? Meaning 100% of people get 40% of what they want. 100% get 30% of what they want versus 20% getting 100% of what they want or 50% getting, that's not going to work. He is going to have to make concessions. So he has to focus on what can be done tomorrow, right? Without any extra policies, laws passed, whatever. Yes, we need more garbage pickup. So no littering, no pouring out your drinks on the sidewalks, no spitting, no defecating, no urinating on the sidewalks, none of that. That can be implemented relatively quickly. That would be good for everybody. We'll just increase the sanitation budget. Finding a place for these homeless vagrants in abandoned buildings, repurposing the abandoned office buildings into rehab centers or shelters for the homeless, potentially, right? Instead of having them in the subways, etc. Some things can be done relatively quickly. But now it's time for me to put on my conspiracy theory hat. When I saw Mamdani and his meteoric rise to success, the first thing I asked myself was, where this nigga come from? Where did he come from? This dude is only 34 years old. He came out of nowhere. And he's giving me CIA, Obama, globalist vibes. He's giving me, backed and sponsored by some really, really powerful people who are globalists. What seems to be happening is that a lot of our institutions and our government agencies are being controlled by actors who are not U.S. citizens or who are globalists, internationalists, right? These are people who do not care about the cultural identity or the citizens of the countries they're trying to control. These are people from Europe, people from the Middle East, Asia, whatever is going on. A lot of our corporations and a lot of our government policies are being influenced by people who are not American citizens or who are first generation. This is not anti-immigration, and this is not about that. Globalists do not care about the identity or the culture of the nation that they are controlling or that they're influencing. All they care about is making money by influencing power players. You got people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and people who are first generation immigrants or who are immigrants in general coming to the country and controlling the country in some way, shape, or form. People like George Soros, right? In 2006 and 2007, when Obama first popped up on my radar, the first thing I asked was, where did this dude come from? Where did this nigga come from? Who are you? New York City is the capital of capitalism. Mamdani is an outsider. He spent most of his formative years living in Africa. Kamala Harris spent most of her formative years living in Canada, I believe. Obama spent most of his formative years living in Indonesia and in Hawaii, right? He was not on the mainland. These people are globalists. And New York City is considered a global city, it is what it is. But where did this dude come from? Who was sponsoring and backing him? How did this guy come from literally nowhere and topple the establishment? I don't trust people who come out of nowhere and have all this power. Is Mamdani being backed by globalists? Because he doesn't necessarily have a vested interest in maintaining the cultural identity of New York City if he's not from the country. It's a different relationship. Not saying that immigrants can't care about the country that they've migrated to, but they're not usually nationalists. Immigrants are not nationalists of the country. Typically, they're not national of the country that they're living in. That's why they wave their foreign flags on American soil. They have their holidays celebrating the country they come from. Most immigrants are not going to be as nationalistic as the citizens of the country that they're migrating to. That's just par for the course. This is not an indictment against them. They're not wrong for that. It's good to love your homeland where you came from. But I do find it interesting and odd that they use the Obama model for Mamdani. Obama is supposedly Muslim also. For president, Obama was also very young. Mamdani is only 34 years old. Where the F did he come from? Where did he come from? So with that, right, the first half of this conversation was about, the practical aspects of his campaign policies. But in my mind, the back of my mind, as I'm saying all this, I'm like, I don't trust this dude. I don't know where he came from. Where are his people from? Who was sponsoring him? Who's vetting him? It kind of reminds me of like Black Lives Matter, right? All these people receiving all this money or these massive protests that are going on in these big cities. Who was funding these so-called activist protesters to burn down the cities? Where are they now? What happened to Black Lives Matter? So you have these international actors influencing American politics and businesses. And these are usually globalists who come from like Eastern Europe or other places that are foreign to the country that they are now in control of. It's just weird to me. Even Donald Trump is a second generation or first generation American. citizen. His parents are from Germany. Like, why are all these first-generation people who do not have ties to colonial America controlling the fate of the nation? Not saying that immigrants can't have a say in what's going on with this country, but the relationship to the nation is different. And if you have a globalist agenda, you're going to put people who are not nationalists in power to serve the globalist agenda. If he's from Uganda by way of India, he don't give a F. Kamala Harris her parents are from Jamaica. She was born in California, lives in Canada. Like, it's not the first time it's happened. Obama, weird origins. I was living in Hawaii and Indonesia. Like, I don't know. I feel like Mamdani is another globalist puppet to do the bidding of major corporations that are anti-nationalist. They don't care about the cultural identity of the country. They don't care about the economic sovereignty of the country. They're sellouts, and they want to sell us out to the highest bidder for whatever agenda they have. It could be for, AI surveillance. It could be for jabs and other things. I don't know what he's here for, but I do not believe that he's going to be able to do anything that he states that he's planning on doing. I think he's there for other reasons, because what he's saying that he's going to do seems to be very impractical, considering how much bureaucratic red tape he'll have to circumvent in order to get things done in a very short period of time. I think he's here for other reasons. I think he's going to use New York City as a test pilot for like 15-minute smart cities, or cities that are, chipping people, or mass surveillance. I think they're going to try to normalize that in some way, shape, or form. So it's like, in order for me to enforce these policies, I need y'all to do this. And this meaning give up some of your freedom, your sovereignty, your privacy for the sake of the greater good of New York City. Something like that. I think New Yorkers are going to be compelled to make a Faustian bargain for the things that he's promising. If you want this and that and the third, you want free this and free that, you must let us do this to you. You must let us surveil you or control you in some way. This is what happened during the jab years. In order for you to keep your job, or to have a place to live, or to take care of yourself, you got to put this experimentation in your body. Faustian bargain. I think he is supposed to be the face of that for New York City. He's supposed to be implementing this plan as a pilot for the country. I think, like many other politicians who want to seem progressive and for the people, they branded him with urban culture, urban music, and urban identity. Black culture, hip hop, whatever. They branded him with that image to make him more palatable. Because again, this is an Indian man from Uganda. What the hell does he have in common with Black American people? To keep it a stack. Not saying that he can't learn about Black American culture and ways, but that's not the point. It's not about anti-immigration. I want to know what F this man came from. Who were his backers? How did he get all this money and power? He's 34 years old. I heard his parents are millionaires. Let's not play this game again. Let's not act as if this man's our savior. There are other things that I think he's going to be implementing that will force New Yorkers to give up some of their human rights and their sovereignty for these goodies. Now, if you are pro-immigration, you're an immigrant, you'll be more willing to make these compromises to stay in the country. If you're not that, if you're an American citizen, you may be more nationalistic, and you may want to protect your human and civil rights because they can't deport you otherwise. But if you're an immigrant, if you want to stay in the city, if you want to do this, if you want free this, you want low that, you're going to have to let us do certain things to you for this policy to be enforced. We got to keep track of you. We got to put this in your body. We got to whatever plans they have in place. I feel like they're using him as the face of that. See, he's young, he's hip, he's cool, he's anti-establishment, he's an immigrant Muslim. Just like Obama, he's Muslim and he's biracial. He's not like the Bushes. And we find out George Bush is goddamn near his benefactor. He's skull and bones, Obama. Then we find out that, Obama basically sold out the country to Vanguard and State Street and BlackRock and these investors and globalists. He sold this out, okay? So again, Mamdani seems cool. He's always smiling, but I don't give a F about the smile. I don't know where he came from, so I don't trust him at all. Sorry. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing your feedback. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will speak to you soon.